7 children and the Alps, supposedly. Beautiful music, gorgeous.
Picture this. You're watching one of the most romantic scenes in movie history. Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer are about to share their first kiss in a beautiful gazebo. Soft moonlight streaming through the windows. Everything looks perfect, magical even. But what if I told you that behind the cameras, something so ridiculous was happening that it made the entire cast break down laughing? Something so embarrassing that the studio banned everyone from talking about it for 30 years? Welcome back to my channel, where we dig deep into Hollywood's best-kept secrets. Today, we're uncovering the truth about The Sound of Music's most romantic scene and why it became the movie's most forbidden story. The Sound of Music hit theaters in 1965 and quickly became a worldwide sensation. It knocked Gone with the Wind off its throne as the highest-grossing film of all time. Nearly 1 in 12 people alive back then saw this movie. But behind all that success was a chaotic production filled with disasters, fights, and one particularly embarrassing moment that the studio desperately wanted to hide. Let me take you back to Austria in 1964, where a crew of over 250 people was trying to make movie magic. The film was supposed to cost $8 million, which was already a huge amount back then. But everything that could go wrong did go wrong. It was one of the wettest years on record in Salzburg. Rain poured down almost every day. What was supposed to be 6 weeks of filming stretched to 11 weeks. The crew sat around doing nothing, waiting for the clouds to clear while hotel bills and wages piled up. Fox Studios was already bleeding money from a disaster that was Cleopatra. That movie had nearly killed the company. Now executives were watching The Sound of Music's budget explode and wondering if this cheerful family film might finish them off for good. But the real drama was happening between the actors themselves. Julie Andrews, fresh off her success with Mary Poppins, was not the sweet, easygoing person people expected. She was a perfectionist who worried constantly that the movie would become too sugary and fake. She kept asking director Robert Wise and her co-star Christopher Plummer, "How do we make this real? How do we cut the syrup?" Christopher Plummer, on the other hand, absolutely hated the entire project. He called it The Sound of Mucus and thought the whole thing was beneath him as a serious actor. He had only agreed to do the movie after demanding changes to his character. Even then, he spent most of the filming drinking heavily. He later admitted he was completely drunk during some of the most emotional scenes, including the music festival where Captain Von Trapp sings with tears in his eyes. The children weren't having an easy time either. 5-year-old Kim Carruth, who played Little Gretel, almost drowned during the boat scene. Julie Andrews was supposed to grab her quickly when the boat flipped, but everything went wrong. The boat capsized harder than expected. Andrews fell the wrong way, and little Kim went under the water twice before another actor dove in to save her. She vomited from swallowing so much water and developed a fear of swimming that stayed with her for life. Even that famous opening scene where Julie Andrews spins in the meadow, singing wasn't as magical as it looked. A helicopter flew just above her, with a cameraman strapped to the side. Every time it passed, the powerful wind knocked Andrews to the ground. She got slammed down 6 or 7 times, eating dirt and grass each time, but she kept trying to smile and sing while secretly preparing for the next hit. The weather wasn't just ruining outdoor scenes. It was creating all kinds of problems indoors, too. The constant rain and cold meant the crew had to use massive lights to fake sunshine in scenes that were supposed to look cheerful and bright. And those lights would soon become the source of the movie's most embarrassing secret. Now, let's talk about the gazebo scene that nobody was allowed to discuss. This was supposed to be the emotional climax of the film. Maria and Captain Von Trapp finally confessed their love for each other and share their first kiss. The script called for soft, romantic lighting that would make everything look dreamy and magical. The crew set up these enormous carbon arc lights to create the perfect moonlight effect. These machines were supposed to give a scene that soft, glowing look that would make audiences melt. But there was one tiny problem nobody had anticipated. These lights made a sound, and not just any sound. They made a noise that sounded exactly like someone making a long, wet raspberry with their mouth. You know the sound I'm talking about. The kind of rude noise little kids make when they're being silly. Picture this. Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer are standing nose to nose, about to deliver the most romantic lines in the entire movie. Christopher starts to say, "Maria, I love you," and right at that exact moment, the lights let out this ridiculous, flatulent-sounding raspberry noise. Both actors immediately burst into laughter. They tried to get serious again, but it was too late. Every single time they leaned in for the kiss, those lights would groan and make another embarrassing sound. The timing couldn't have been worse. Right in the middle of the most emotional dialogue, there would be another loud, wet raspberry sound. They tried again and again. 20 times they attempted to film that scene. 20 failed takes. Julie Andrews later said they were standing there trying so hard to stay professional, but every single time that sound would hit and they'd completely lose it. The more they tried to be serious, the harder they laughed. It became a vicious cycle. The technical crew just stood there watching helplessly as hours slipped by. These were expensive hours with hundreds of people on the payroll, and the two main stars were giggling like school kids because of some ridiculous sound effects. Director Robert Wise was getting more frustrated by the minute. The studio executives were probably calculating how much money they were losing every time those lights made their rude noises. Finally, Robert Wise gave up on the original plan completely. He scrapped the fancy lighting setup and told his team they were going to shoot the entire scene differently. Instead of showing the actors' faces clearly, he decided to film them in silhouette against the gazebo's glowing windows. This way, the audience wouldn't be able to see if the actors were struggling not to laugh, and more importantly, they could turn off those noisy lights. What started as a complete disaster ended up creating one of the most beautiful and iconic romantic scenes in movie history. The silhouette approach made everything look mysterious and dreamy. The soft glow from the windows created exactly the romantic mood they were trying to achieve. Most viewers think that artistic choice was planned from the beginning. Nobody suspected it was born out of pure chaos and embarrassment. But here's where the story gets really interesting. 20th Century Fox was absolutely determined that nobody would ever find out about those raspberry sounds. The studio clamped down hard on everyone involved. Actors, crew members, directors, everyone was told the same thing. Never mention the failed takes, the laughter, or those ridiculous noises from the lights. Everything had to stay magical and perfect in the public's mind. The studio controlled every interview and behind-the-scenes story. When reporters asked about the filming process, they got carefully scripted answers about the beauty of Austria and the joy of working with such talented people. Nobody was allowed to talk about the real chaos, the constant rain, the budget problems, or especially those embarrassing light sounds. For 30 years, fans believed that romantic gazebo scene had been filmed perfectly on the first try. They thought Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer had just naturally created that magical moment together. The truth about the raspberry light stayed locked away like a state secret. Christopher Plummer, who already hated the movie, was particularly good at keeping quiet about this embarrassing incident. Even though he spent years openly mocking the film and calling it the sound of mucus, he never breathed a word about what really happened in that gazebo. His hatred for the project actually helped keep the secret safe because nobody expected him to protect the movie's reputation. The truth finally started coming out much later, when Julie Andrews began appearing on talk shows and feeling more comfortable sharing behind-the-scenes stories. She was the one who first revealed the raspberry light disaster to the public. During one television interview, she described standing nose to nose with Christopher Plummer, tried to be romantic, while these awful sound effects kept ruining every take. Once Julie opened that door, other people involved in production started sharing their own memories of that chaotic day. The story of the raspberry lights became one of those Hollywood legends that makes you realize even the most perfect-looking movies are created by real people dealing with ridiculous problems. But the gazebo scene wasn't the only secret The Sound of Music was hiding. The entire production was filled with moments that would have shocked audiences if they had known about them at the time. Remember that touching scene where Captain Von Trapp sings Edelweiss with tears in his eyes during the music festival? Christopher Plummer later admitted he was completely drunk while filming it. He called himself a pampered, arrogant young bastard and said he'd been drinking heavily throughout much of the production. Yet somehow, his drunken performance became one of the most emotional moments in the entire film. And here's another secret that might surprise you. When Captain Von Trapp sings, you're often not hearing Christopher Plummer's voice at all. A professional singer named Bill Lee provided many of the longer vocal notes. Plummer was annoyed by this decision because he felt it stripped away part of his performance. But the dubbing was done so well that most people still think they're hearing Plummer sing. Even the children faced serious challenges that audiences never knew about. The weather was so terrible that it was the worst spring Salzburg had seen in 50 years. The constant delays meant some of the child actors started growing during the long filming process. One lost all her baby teeth and had to wear fake ones. Nicholas Hammond, who played Friedrich, shot up from 5 feet 3 inches to nearly 6 feet tall. He had to go barefoot in some scenes to match the height of his co-stars. The hair and makeup disasters were equally dramatic. Daniel Truitt, who played Rolf, had his hair bleached so aggressively that it never grew back the same way. He was only 20 years old, but the damage was permanent. His hair thinned out and never returned to normal. Fans would meet him years later and wonder why his hair was dark when they remembered him as blonde. Julie Andrews had her own hair nightmare. The producers thought the back of her head looked too dark on camera, so they sent her for highlights. Something went terribly wrong, and she ended up with bright orange hair. The team panicked and had to chop her hair even shorter and dye it blonde to cover up the disaster. What makes all these behind-the-scenes disasters even more remarkable is how completely they were hidden from the public. The Sound of Music became a cultural phenomenon that sold 283 million tickets worldwide. People who didn't even speak English were singing along to the songs. It won 5 Academy Awards and convinced critics that musicals could be serious art, not just entertainment. But the most tragic part of the Sound of Music story might be how little Julie Andrews earned from its massive success. She was paid $225,000 up front with no royalties and no percentage of the box office profits. The film went on to earn over $286 million globally, and she didn't see a single additional dollar beyond that original check. Meanwhile, Mary Martin had earned over $8 million from the Broadway version. Fox Studios had been desperate after the Cleopatra disaster nearly killed the company, so they kept costs as low as possible. Julie Andrews' salary now stands as one of Hollywood's biggest miscalculations. The biggest star of their most successful film was a person they underpaid the most. The story gets even sadder when you learn about Maria von Trapp herself. The real Maria had sold her life story rights to German producers in the 1950s for just $9,000, not realizing she was giving up all control over future versions. When Hollywood bought those rights and made their movie, Maria was completely left out of the process. She made no money from the American version. They didn't ask for her input, and she wasn't even invited to the 1965 film premiere. When she asked about attending, they told her there were no seats left. Imagine being locked out of your own life story, watching the world fall in love with a version of your experiences that you had no control over, while other people made hundreds of millions of dollars from your life. The real story behind The Sound of Music is so much more complex and interesting than the perfect fairy tale that appeared on screen. Between the raspberry lights, the drunken performances, the hair disasters, the near-drowning incidents, and the constant rain, it's amazing they managed to create any movie at all, let alone one of the most beloved films in history. That romantic gazebo scene that nobody was allowed to talk about for 30 years perfectly represents everything about this production. What looked effortless and magical on screen was actually born from chaos, embarrassment, and the determination of professionals who refused to give up even when everything was going wrong. The next time you watch The Sound of Music, remember that behind every perfect moment was a group of people dealing with ridiculous problems and finding creative ways to solve them. Those raspberry sounds that made Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer laugh until they cried became the reason we got one of cinema's most beautiful romantic scenes. Hollywood has always been built on secrets, but some secrets are worth sharing. The story of those embarrassing lights reminds us that movie magic isn't about everything going perfectly. It's about talented people finding ways to create something beautiful even when everything is falling apart around them. If you enjoyed learning about the hidden truth behind The Sound of Music's most forbidden scene, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more behind-the-scenes Hollywood secrets. Share this video with anyone who loves classic movies or thinks they know everything about the sound of music. Trust me, they'll be as shocked as you were to learn about those raspberry lights. And let me know in the comments what classic movie you'd like me to investigate next. There are so many more secrets hiding behind our favorite films, and I can't wait to uncover them with you.